right, welcome everyone. We'll be getting started in just a second. Thank you so much for joining us today for this Artist Lab. All right. I think we can go ahead and get started. We'll just unshare the image so you can see our faces a bit better. Great. All right. Thank you everybody so much for coming to this Artist Lab today. I just want you to note that this session is being recorded. This will be a 1-hour program and we'll be devoting ample time to questions, a little bit in the middle and then at the end. But please use the Q&A button to make sure we can easily find your question. Please note also that we have captions and interpretation available for today's event. Thank you to our captioner, Rebecca, and to our interpreters, Hercules and Vern, and to my Creative Capital colleague, Saidu Kamara, who's going to be dropping information and links in the chat. My name is Dr. Aliza Shvarts, and I'm the Director of Artist Initiatives here at Creative Capital. My pronouns are she, her, and I have long dark hair, and I'm wearing a black top and gold chain and sitting in front of a bookcase. I'm joining you today from our Creative Capital offices, which are situated on the unceded ancestral homelands of the Lenape people, called Lenape-Hoking, colonially referred to as Manhattan. The Creative Capital website and servers, which make today possible, occupy Ohlone, Chuqueño, and Ramaytush land, commonly referred to as South Beach, California, and Tonga land, commonly referred to as Los Angeles. I encourage you to introduce yourselves, I see some of you have already, by placing your names, pronouns, and locations in the chat. I'm very excited for today's Artist Lab. The Artist Labs are part of the Creative Capital curriculum, a newly launched educational initiative, which is available to artists to take for free at their own pace via an online platform called Canvas. You can register on our website to take a look at the curriculum using the link in the chat or finding our education page. And it's my extreme pleasure to introduce today the artist who's going to be leading the Artist Lab, Meredith Talusan. Meredith is a 2023 Creative Capital grantee, and she's going to be speaking today about networking. Meredith is, I'm just going to give you a little bit more of an introduction bio for Meredith. Meredith is an interdisciplinary artist who works in literature, visual art, and dance, though she is primarily known publicly as an author and journalist. Her memoir, Fairest, published by Viking in 2020, was a finalist for the Lambda Literary Awards and named Best Book of the Year by multiple outlets. Her fiction appears or is forthcoming in Kenyon Review, Guernica, the Boston Review, Epic, Grand, Catapult, The Rumpus, and BLR, and her nonfiction has been published in The Atlantic, The New York Times, and The Guardian, Wired, and Condé Nast Traveler, among many other publications. She was recently a MacDowell Fellow and has contributed to 10 books, including the New York Times bestselling Not That Bad and the fiction anthology Anonymous Sex. She received her MA in Comparative Literature and MFA in Creative Writing from Cornell University. As a dancer, Talusan trained for several years at the Merce Cunningham and Trisha Brown Studios and was a working board member for the Interdisciplinary Laboratory for Art, Nature, and Dance for 7 years, giving talks at the organization's yearly summit, leading workshops, and facilitating group performances. As a visual artist, Talusan received her MFA in photography from California College of the Arts and has exhibited in Boston, New York, and San Francisco, as well as photographed for Vice, Medium, and BuzzFeed News. It's my extreme honor to welcome Meredith and to learn from you alongside everyone else on low stress networking for artists. So thank you so much, Meredith, and over to you.
Hi, everybody. It's really great to be here. It's just such a pleasure. And it's also ironic because the reason I am giving this talk today is because I befriended Aliza at Creative Capital Carnival. and said, that I would love to be involved in the Creative Capital curriculum. And so then she invited, and we had lunch, and we were talking about what I could contribute. And she observed that I'm a friendly, extroverted person. And so this talk came organically from that conversation. So I'm just gonna share my screen. I have some wacky slides that I have for you today. My novel in part deals with ecology and has an AI subplot. So I've been researching AI image generation tools. And as a person who doesn't like PowerPoint type presentations, because I always feel like a lot of times people write down points by rote without actually absorbing what speakers are saying. But at the same time, this being a Zoom talk, I know that it can often be hard to concentrate. So what I did was I just generated some abstract images from some of the AI generation image generation tools that I've been researching. So anyway, those are the slides that you're going to see today. So when we talk about networking brings up a ton of baggage. For me, as somebody who didn't grow up in the States and didn't grow up with the concept, I had earlier in my life thought of networking as something that people not like needed, and then also something that is sort of something that is unsavory, or something that people who sell out do, right? And I think it's taken me a really long time to just sort of realize that networking is really just an extension of human relationships, right? And that there are ways to network that don't have to feel icky, and there are ways to network that don't have to feel like you're doing it as a form of labor apart from what we already have the fundamental capacity to do, which is form relationships with each other. So that's why I decided to call this talk Low Stress Networking, because what I want to propose is that the process of forming relationships that end up advancing one's career doesn't have to feel unduly burdensome. So as I said, I grew up in the Philippines and was very much an outsider for many years. I immigrated when I was 15, went to an Ivy League school, didn't really understand what was going on, saw people, sort of like forming relationships, and was very much like, felt like I was an outsider looking in. And then it was really only after college that I realized that there were ways for me to integrate my own personal tendencies and my upbringing into the ways in which I communicate and interface with people. For people who are Filipino or know Filipino people intimately, we are a very communal, it's a very communal environment. It's a very communal society. And over the years, I found that I don't necessarily have to model the ways that I work after other people in order for me to feel like I am still, kind of furthering my goals as an artist by having human interactions. And then more recently, the environment of mutual support among feminist and queer writers was really helpful when I was just starting out. And I try to model what I've learned now that I'm more established. When I started writing for the general public in 2014, I was a graduate student at Cornell who had very little local support, but there was such an outpouring of support for my work online among both feminists and queer folks who were encouraging writers from marginalized backgrounds. And that was something that I really relied on earlier in my career. And it's a lot of what drives me to give talks like this one for people who might be in kind of like formative stages or earlier, or are interested in furthering various aspects of their relationships to their practice in relationship to networking and also other issues related to art, right, is because other people have done that for me. And so, you know, my main argument is that at heart, networking is about forming genuine relationships, whether online or offline. Very few people enjoy relationships that are purely transactional, and people in your industry are always so much more than the role that they play, right? So, you know, so often one of the things that I find is that people tend to be like, oh, you know, like I only want to make friends. Like I don't want to, you know, like I don't want to sully my whatever, my relationships with people by bringing business into it. Or I only want to form a business relationship or some form of transactional relationship with a person. And I think at heart, I think it's really important to just come to terms with the fact that at least I don't feel like that's a particularly realistic way of approaching human relationships, because inevitably the people that we interact with are in some way going to also interact with the parts of our work that we would call career related, et cetera, et cetera. And there are healthy and productive and joyful ways of managing those relationships. So the way I approach networking is in a lot of ways the same as I approach building friendships, except that those friendships are with people who are broadly relevant to my work. And I don't put pressure on myself to target specific people, but allow my natural curiosity to guide me, as well as taking the time to go to relevant industry events to let me build connections naturally. So I feel like for me, there's this really good balance, and it's a balance that I really cultivate between friends who are in the industry, in the industries that I work in, and people who are not. And then also there a lot of people who are kind of in the middle range where, you know, like they might be artists, but not necessarily artists, you know, practicing in fields that I'm practicing in, right? But we have things to talk about. And one of the ways that I do that is that I try to go to events that are broadly applicable, but not in this sort of like super kind of like targeted strategic way, right? Like I go to events based on the things that I'm interested in. And usually when I meet people at those events, I meet like-minded people, but not in the sort of like super kind of just sort of like direct transactional way. And I feel like that's been very healthy, both in terms of, you know, in terms of not making it feel like the interactions that I have with people are pressure filled, but also at a personal level, you know, feeling like, you know, like feeling like I'm able to form friendships and also find connections, find ways to sort of advance my work, but doing it really organically and being integrated into the human relationships that I already have, right? And this can be one of the things that I recognize in Aliza and I. Aliza identifies as an introvert, and a lot of people, and also a lot of introverted friends that I talk to about this, you know, talk about it being a challenge for them, you know, because I am naturally on the extroverted end of the scale. And what I tell my friends is that you don't necessarily need to be the extrovert, right? Like you just need to form you know, like a diverse set of relationships. And usually, you know, there are a few people in the relationships that you have that are extroverted, and there are the people who are happy to organize things, and there are people who take pleasure in doing that, right? One of the things that I realized about myself is that a lot of people feel pressure organizing things, and I don't. I'm somebody who's really happy to do it, and very much enjoys the role of bringing people together. And then I want to make a distinction between two kinds of networking, which I would call broad networking versus deep networking. Broad networking is about forming as many relationships as possible, regardless of intimacy, whereas deep networking is more about forming substantial relationships with, with a smaller set of people. When I was working as a full-time editor, it was helpful for me to be a broad networker because I needed to know as many people as possible. But I naturally gravitate towards deep networking, which I think also really serves us as writers. So this is one of the stereotypes about networking is like, oh, like I need to know as many people as possible. I need to just sort of like cast my net as widely as possible. And for me, I think it's actually been really important to just when I'm at an event, I really only have like 2 or 3, substantial conversations for lengthy periods of time, because I know that any person that I get to know well and that I, like form a genuine bond with, that person, if I actually, click with them at a personal level and we have mutual interests, that person will also, like that person also has an entire world of associations and and people around them that are probably closer to my own interests than me, just trying to sort of like get to know everybody in the room, right? So I usually only talk to a few people rather than trying to talk to everyone. And I also don't pressure myself to target people with direct relationships to my work. Sometimes I end up talking directly relevant people and sometimes not, but that's fine, right? I connect with people based on affinity and personality match rather than the relationship to my work. Even if people I get to know aren't directly tied to what I'm doing, they're often parts of groups that are relevant to my work. And often the ways that I get connected to venues or outlets or editors that are relevant to my work is not through somebody that I know directly, but through a friend of a friend. And that's actually usually a more organic and genuine way to do it anyway, because it can often feel kind of awkward, right, to pitch or to directly engage with somebody who personally only at a social level. And then also it can feel like a turnoff for people to get, directly pitch in the middle of an event. So I allow career opportunities to arise as organically as possible. And then this is my prescribed time to break for a couple of questions. So I'm gonna unshare my screen for a bit. And so that we can talk. Aliza and I talked about this, and I'm uncomfortable talking for super long periods of time. So it's nice that I get to talk to you for a bit, Aliza.
Great. Yeah, we already do have some questions, and I will say we're just going to answer a couple now, but there'll be more time at the end. And if we don't get to your question, you can email it to us, and we will try and address it over email. So the first question I see, I think is an opportunity to delve deeper into that very interesting distinction that you are making between the types of networking. So this question is, what is the distinction you're making in the type of networking you're doing? More specifically, how does that influence your own approach? How do you nourish those relationships in a way that distinguishes them from being transactional?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like there's so much pressure a lot of the time, and I observe this in people when they're at events, right? Like I need to, I want to write for, like in my case, write for a magazine or like meet a certain person, like, just sort of engage with a specific people or oh, like I need to get to know, like this is an event where there are a bunch of people who are relevant to my work. So I need to like know as many of them as possible. And I think for me, my approach is always, I think over the years has just really been actually, no, like I'm just gonna I'm just going to talk to the people that I happen to talk to at that moment. And there will always be the next event. And there are always other opportunities to do career related things. But then also, I also just really try to make those interactions as genuine as possible, to really get to know people. And that often takes time, right? Like it often is the case that, like for a 2-hour event, I would only be talking to 3 or 4 people rather than, whatever, like 15 or 20. And I think over time, one of the things that I find is that over the course of, like 2 or 3 events, usually, like 1 or 2 people actually have some sort of relevance to my work, or I find out that this person who I've become, like I've formed a genuine bond with, actually is friends with the actual person who is much more directly relevant to my work, right? And over the course of our association, wouldn't mind introducing us, right? So it's a much more kind of like low key, low stress, like not like, oh my God, like how am I gonna, sort of like handle this approach? It actually is just, it's actually just kind of like an extension of a much more human way to interact with people.
Yeah, I think that really resonates also with the other points that you were making about how this is really about being part of a community. Everyone has the different people they bring with them. And yeah, and this maybe leads into our next question. Maybe what gives us most anxiety for those of us who have trouble networking is that feeling that we have to talk to one individual. But remembering people are connected, and actually authenticity is a way of, showing up, can maybe help with that. But this next question is specifically, what would you recommend for those who experience social anxiety or those who are geographically isolated?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like when I started, I was living in Ithaca, New York, and and a lot of my, and I really didn't think of it as networking at the time, right? Like I was just forming connections with people online. A couple of, like I had some friends of friends who were editors. And this is actually what happened. I had a friend of a friend who was an editor who I really liked, and we would banter on Facebook, but then she took a Facebook break and then and the only way that I could interact with her was through Twitter. Her name is Jess Zimmerman. She's an amazing editor. And so then I just started bantering with her on Twitter. And then pretty soon, people were bantering with me and following me. And I just became part of that ecosystem. Unfortunately, Twitter isn't as conducive to that as it has been. But I feel like the sort of like, like Twitter being more fragmented still, creates all of these opportunities to interact with people. It's actually, it's actually like a really interesting time, I think, to just because there are a lot of sort of like fragmentary, like more sort of like diverse ways for people to interact, right? Like I have been interacting whenever I've been, one of the things that has happened recently is that whenever I've been at conferences, for instance, people are much more likely to form, kind of like private text chats, or, people are actually more like, or actually make time to meet in real life, right? Aliza and I recently, with some friends, have formed a club where we like go around and see art exhibits in New York every month, right? Like I feel like the fact that there's been kind of an online vacuum has actually allowed people to interact more in person, right? And I think even if you're not, like I'm not living in New York right now, right? Even if you're not living close to these city centers like New York or LA, I think taking the time to sort of like do a monthly trip, right? Like finding a friend to do a monthly trip with, where you go to an event, you go to a reading, or, like you just see like something that's relevant to your, to your practice that is often enough for you to be able to sort of maintain relationships, and also to not get discouraged if it doesn't like work out the first or the second time, right? Because sometimes it takes a few times for you to meet people who are relevant to you, who really click with your work.
We have a lot of questions, but I'm just going to pose one more, and I will try to get to more when we have questions in the end. But
Yes.
also, please keep asking them. We're collecting them, so we will try and get back to you via email if we miss your question. But this one is pretty, I think, very practical and open-ended, and maybe will help lead into the next component of the talk, which is how do you initiate conversation?
Oh yeah. How do I initiate conversation? There are two ways that I initiate conversation. One of them is active and the other is passive. So usually, so I am the type of person who, I think it's interesting because social anxiety is something that I often feel in real life environments. And I've just learned over time to just sort of not take it's not even rejection, right? Like not take it personally when an interaction doesn't click. Like it's just the way it is. And so, and so often I don't even necessarily introduce myself, right? Like I just make some sort of like general, some sort of general point about the event, some sort of comment about the drinks being too strong, or when we were at Creative Capital Carnival, there were screenings and I was just like, oh my God, like I sat next to this like artist that I was Ron Athey, who was like I was a super fan of, and I didn't even know that he was sitting next to me until all of the lights came up, right? So it isn't, so for me, it isn't like, hi, like I'm Meredith Talusan, I am an artist, right? Like it's much more like, hey, like there's just something that we'll bond over. So there's just like, that's just sort of like an active way for me to do it. And then my low-key, passive, slightly strategic way of doing it is I usually think to myself, okay, like what would be something that, like somebody might comment on, right? Like somebody might be, like I have a Keith Haring t-shirt that I know whenever I wear my Keith Haring t-shirt, people who are fans of Keith Haring, usually they're just like, oh my God, like you're wearing Keith Haring. And, like I've had it since whatever, like the late 90s or something. So it looks very vintage, right? So, so usually like, or, if I wear my hairstyle a particular way, and usually that gives people kind of like an invitation to talk to me. So those are two ways that I usually kind of like initiate conversations with people.
Style is strategy. That's really, that really speaks to me. Well, we're going to take more questions at the very end, but Meredith, back to you and your amazing slides.
Sure. Yeah, we can talk about the slides at the end. All right, so I will keep going. Okay. Let's see. I have my and then and so another aspect, I've talked about broad networking versus deep networking. Another concept that I want to introduce is this idea of approximate versus direct reciprocity. So a lot of times, the part of the reason we network is so that, so that we can maybe at some point, connect with somebody who can help advance our career in a particular way. And one of the things that has been very important for me in terms of my relationships with people, making my relationships with people super low stress, like not creating just sort of like tensions within my friendship and professional relationship group, is this concept of approximate rather than direct reciprocity. By approximate reciprocity, what I mean is that I always try to be helpful as best I can, but don't put any pressure on other people at all to reciprocate directly or even at all, right? So it's just this sort of like general, if you want to call it, kind of like a general notion of karma, like that might be another way of framing it. So if I see an opportunity to be helpful to other people that wouldn't be too much trouble for me, I always take it. And I just don't really think about like what the sort of like benefits or repercussions are for myself. And I just have zero expectations about what I would get in return. The opportunities for folks I've helped to return the favor do often arise naturally, right? So for instance, a really good example is that my friend Arturo is a former Creative Capital grantee, and without, like with absolutely just like no, we were in a writing class together, and I offered to, read more of their work and give them feedback. And so we formed a relationship on that basis, so that it was just very natural that when I was applying for the grant, and I was picking between writing samples, Arturo was the person that I asked for help for, which I'm sure really, because of the fact that they've been through the process, they were very knowledgeable in terms of, like in terms of what, like what samples would be, they thought would be, would be that the jurors for Creative Capital would be drawn to. And obviously it worked. So, so that's another example of this sort of like very organic networking, just sort of really helping me in terms of my career. I also think people are naturally inclined to be helpful when they can. If I've been helpful to them in the past, they try not to think about that too much, since it might lead folks around me to unconsciously feel pressure. I've also been in the position of becoming friends with people when they haven't been in a position to have any effect on my work at all, only for them to be directly relevant years later, right? So that, especially now, I feel like that happens a lot, where, like artists end up being curators, or they end up like running things, or, and for literature people, writers becoming, I had no expectations of becoming an editor early in my career, but then, like later I ended up, like being a relatively highly positioned editor, right? And that has happened to a number of my friends as well, right? So those relationships kind of come in and out organically. And then I just want to talk about, kind of like the role of more kind of like official or formal context, like if you're giving a talk, or if you're being interviewed for something, right? Opportunities to discuss your work to an audience are always really great, but in addition to that, there are opportunities to form relationships that arise because of them. The reception or signing after a talk or panel is always an opportunity to meet people who are connected to your work. So I try to take time to find and cultivate those conversations and connections, right? Like sometimes it feels intimidating when you've given a talk to then, sort of like talk to people after, but I really try to sort of be as receptive and open and really listen in those environments, because often the people who respond to you and talk to you after are people who you actually end up, getting a ton of ideas from, and maybe having more of a relationship down the road. I've also, like as a writer, I've also really enjoyed befriending booksellers and event organizers who are by and large such knowledgeable readers and champions of books, right? And this is also the case for, like for people who work in the art world or performing arts, right? Like a lot of times, I'm just as likely to befriend, like the gallery attendant, or, like the person who is, who's running the event, because often they have so much knowledge, and also they know more about the ins and outs of what's actually going on. And I have had really significant opportunities actually that have come out of my relationships with booksellers and event organizers. And then I also, of course, like having the opportunity to talk to fellow panelists before and after events and moderators. And then a number of folks have interviewed me for podcasts. I've also formed lasting relationships with, and so since that relationship is ongoing, whenever I have an opportunity to, if I'm promoting something, I usually ask those people if they'd be interested in having me on their podcast. And then I want to talk about online networking. And what I want to say is that it's useful to participate in online networking to the degree that you're interested, but it's also not an obligation unless your work very much lives on the internet, right? And the thing about, I highly, highly recommend actually Jenny Odell's How to Do Nothing in relationship to this, right? Because there's this really long-running tension between what social media wants you to do with it, which is be completely and absolutely addicted to it, and just like use it all the time, versus like what you actually can use it for, right? Because of the fact that it's become such a powerful tool for promotion, a lot of people find it very difficult to avoid it. As a journalist, for me, that was the case with Twitter. And then when I became an editor at Condé Nast and was working on fashion and lifestyle, Instagram became very important for me. But one of the things that I've learned is that I can actually manage my social media and have my own relationship to social media other than what the social media companies want out of me. And a really concrete manifestation of that is the fact that I post on Instagram, but I post and delete Instagram every time that I post on it, because I know that I don't actually want to be addicted. So whenever I post, I look at, I spend the period of time that I spend looking at my friends' posts and, and catching up with people, and then I delete the app, and I do that every time that I post. Networking online isn't necessarily just about building a large following, though it can be, if that's something that is beneficial to your work. It can also be about forming substantial relationships with specific people you both like and can be helpful to your work, right? And that's really important, because I think a lot of times people get really, really caught up with follower counts. And that's obviously a form of currency in today's market, right? But for me, it's always been more important in terms of like who is keeping in touch with my work rather than how many. I've always been the type of artist who I'm not really that interested in hyper celebrity virality. What I'm actually interested in is people who I respect and care about and whose work I love, being familiar with my work and having an ongoing relationship with my work. So let's see. And then I think this point applies to all forms of networking. It's key to effective and low stress networking not to get overinvested. So it's a very common, it's a very common tendency to just feel like, oh my God, it's always just like, oh, like things are not happening fast enough, or things are not, and people tend to, the energy that you invest in that anxiety, right, is energy that you can, I think, more productively invest in your work, right, and in the genuine relationships that you already have. And also it can feel counterproductive because people often feel that sort of like impatience or that sort of overinvestment when you're too invested in connecting with them. Like I certainly have felt that, as especially when I was still a full-time editor, just feeling like, oh, like I feel this person really wants to connect with me for this tangible opportunity, and that feels like too much pressure, right? And so as a result, it actually distances me from the person rather than brings me closer to the person. You might feel impatient when connections aren't forged or your goals aren't advancing quickly enough, but forcing things wouldn't lead to them going any faster anyway, right? So it's also, as much as there's this temptation to push, it really, like it's not actually particularly productive because it actually has a greater tendency to alienate people. And so at the end of the day, what really matters most is your art. And I'm still a big believer that the better the art is, the more likely it is to find its best audience. Networking is just a way of helping that process along. And it's an embedded part of being an artist, because forming connections with other people is an important part of being a happy human being for the vast majority of us, right? And I'm just going to put up various ways of connecting with me. My website is mtalusan.com. At the bottom of the homepage is my mailing list, where I started this, what was like this very organic, speaking of, just sort of like project to help people introduce writers into the industry during the pandemic, called The Fairest Writer, which has now grown into a community of people and volunteers. And so if you sign up for my mailing list, you'll get regular updates about the writing life, et cetera, et cetera. And then we also, and also broadly applicable to artists. And we also have a Facebook group called The Fairest Writer. It's just about, right now we're a group of 500 people. We try to keep it relatively small, and where I and other people in the group, many of whom are published writers and are working professionally, some of whom are also artists in other fields. Like we answer each other questions and provide advice and contacts, et cetera, et cetera. And I am on Twitter and Instagram as Wanda Meredith, and I occasionally am on it. And let's see, and so that's it. That's really it's all my talks. I had some random notes. Let me just see if there's something that I missed. No, I feel like I have everything that I wanted to say so far. So I'm looking forward to your questions.
Great. Thank you, Meredith, so much. To try and maximize the time that we have, I'm just gonna, I noticed a theme in the questions, so I'm going to combine a couple of them because I think the theme is really interesting. And all the questions that I've noticed, not all, there are other questions, but several of the questions I'm seeing have to do with the idea of access. So for example, if you are neurodivergent and find networking to be really stressful, or if you're avoiding in-person gatherings post, sort of in this moment in the pandemic, so access in terms of ability, also access in terms of class and race. So questions about, how these structures get reproduced. So I thought I'd put it out there as a broader topic because there's lots to say about it. And I know you're going to have some very useful insights. So, and if I didn't answer your, if you feel like your question specifically needs more of an answer, please email us and we'll answer you specifically. But I thought we'd maybe think about the broad topic.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this question is really, is quite applicable to, and I feel like I'm a good person to answer the question as somebody who is really sensitive to all of these structural inequities and to all of these difficulties. I'm albino, and so I have low vision. So it's also hard for me, like it's often a problem for me that it's hard for me to recognize people from a distance, right? So I have my own access issues when it comes to real life events. And I think the thing that I've always the thing that I talk about, and it's really funny because I often make dating metaphors just because of the fact that so many of the concepts actually apply. And one of the things that I talk about with friends who are having dating problems is like finding your well. I always talk about this idea that, like, like find a place where you feel most comfortable. Like we're all, I think, as a community, as a broader community, I know Aliza and I are both extremely, extremely committed to accessibility, but knowing the world as it is, right? Like whatever the existing venues are that you feel most comfortable, then try to engage with those venues. When I was living in Ithaca, New York, for me, that meant being online, right? And specifically, because I'm a person who just like enjoys cracking jokes and being funny on the internet, that meant that meant Twitter at the time, right? So, for people who feel more comfortable online networking, there are a bunch of ways to do that, right? Like Reddit, Quora, WhatsApp, like be the person to be like, oh, like if you're in a group situation, if you're in a literary or like in some sort of conference, see whether people might be interested in starting a WhatsApp group. And I do think that access is a really ongoing problem. Like this is, like for instance, when I started this project, the of one of the things that I did was offer free seminars to anybody who was interested in taking them. And eventually we had a bunch of, we had guests, editors, and agents, and I still try to run the seminar series once a week. One of the things that I realized was that yes, technically everybody had access to it, but even knowing about it, right, like requires a certain degree of access, right? So it's been very important for me to try to broaden my networks and the networks of my volunteers so that, so the people who may not otherwise hear about it can hear about it. It's been important for me, to invite people, like there are people who, like who like who identify with my work or who feel comfortable with me leading a seminar. And so I made sure to invite guests who are from other demographics, right? And from other backgrounds to be able to then, to then bring more people into the project. But yeah, I mean, it's always going to be, we're constantly trying to make the world better. And I feel like it's going to be a lifelong challenge, right? But I think as long as we're collectively invested, I feel hopeful that things will improve steadily.
Yeah, I think that's such a great way to put it. And I love that idea of finding your well. And I think what's really interesting about the way you just framed it is perhaps one could even think about networking, however one does it, as kind of an access, a form of access work, broadening your communities, broadening your networks, building inclusivity in different ways. So I think that's a really cool dimension potentially.
Yeah, and I feel like for me at least, like I'm not as much as I'm an extrovert. I get very nervous around capitalism. And so like anything that involves corporations or anything that involves business, I tend to sort of like freeze up, right? So it's actually been like super, super motivating for me to be like, well, like I get very nervous around, when I was working at Condé Nast, I had to work around super high, super expensive fashion, right? And it's just sort of like, this makes me really nervous, but actually, being able to bring access to this world to people who wouldn't necessarily have it, being able to, to wear and champion minority and queer designers was a really huge motivation for me to be able to engage with that type of work joyfully, right? Rather than being like, oh my God, like I just don't want to have anything to do with this, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I'm going to try and get to a couple more questions while we still have the time. Let's see. what are some of the other turnoffs you noticed at networking events, similar to the idea of, people pitching you? What should early career artists take into consideration when starting to networks? So networking turnoffs.
I think a lot of people, one of the things that I really notice is that people try to sort of like hide their insecurities, or kind of like the ways that because I think it might be just kind of like a product of American bullying culture. Like there's this sort of like knee-jerk reaction to be like, oh, like I'm scared, or like for instance, me, like I have low vision, right? That like, oh my God, like I'm just gonna pretend like I'm not, that I can't see them. And I think over time, one thing that is actually really helpful in terms of like easing tensions around that is to just be upfront, to just be like, so now I tell people, like I often tell people, like if you see me on the street, I might not be able to identify you or something like that, right? And so I really encourage people to, if they can, if they feel comfortable, be forthright about being like, oh, like I'm not a very, like I'm a socially anxious person, so it's like hard for me to do this, right? Like is often better than creating a situation in which like people understand, in which there's kind of like a tension in the room, or there's a tension in the interaction that is not addressed. um and people can't really talk about, right? So that's something that I've noticed in interactions. And the other thing that I've really tried to do is like lead with trust, as much as possible. So I really try, like I'm often in situations where I form kind of like snap judgments of people, and then just realize that it's just like completely, that those judgments are completely baseless, right? That an editor can both be like super hyper powerful and at the same time be really down to earth, right? Or like somebody with a high position in the industry can be really down to earth. And I think, or that somebody can appear a particular way, but actually when you interact with them, they're totally different. And I feel like that's really helpful in terms of like easing any of that sort of like defensiveness or the walls that people build around each other when they're initially interacting.
Yeah, that's such an interesting observation. It seems like there's a tension between vulnerability and what we perceive as like the successful networker, but actually centering vulnerability or leading from that, place of one's authentic self that is vulnerable is maybe a really good strategy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
One of my friends talks about, just to add to this, one of my friends talked about the fact that like he has this habit of complimenting the sort of like super hyper well-dressed people. And usually it's those super hyper well-dressed people who like, as soon as you say, oh, like I really like your outfit, are just like, like they just like completely open up, just because often people they create images in order to ward off their insecurities, and actually they can be some of the most open, some of the most welcoming people, and you just need the sort of like opportunity to praise them, right?
That's a great tip, very concrete. Compliment the stressed. All right, we'll try to fit in maybe one or two more questions. So here's another questions related. How do you follow up? There's actually a couple questions about this. How do you follow up with, the ask that you're not making in person, or follow up by email once you've initiated contact? What's the follow-up procedure like for you?
Well, we can do the case study, Aliza. So I met Aliza at Creative Capital Carnival, and I was really like genuinely just like interested in Creative Capital curriculum. I think it's great. We, like we're both, like people from working class backgrounds who then went on to have like elite, like have these like scholarships in elite colleges, right? So I feel like we just bonded over, like over those similarities. And then, yeah, and then I think I just emailed and was just like, hey, like, do you want to have, the coffee or lunch? And I think a lot of people have social anxieties about that, but I feel like over time, I just don't, I've just learned not to take, people are busy, like sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, like sometimes it's just always, it's just never sort of predictable, right? So yeah, so often I just email, and I just try not to be, like I don't really think about it strategically, like I usually, it's just like, oh, I like this person, I want to, there's some sort of vague way that we would, like, that we might be able to connect over our shared interests in a concrete way. But if it doesn't, it's also totally fine, right? Yeah.
Yeah, and we do have a hard stop at 2, so I'll just, we'll get to the other questions via email. And I want to thank everyone so much. And I'll just say, from the other side of your case study, and as someone who's very nervous about the idea of following up via email, following up with coffee or lunch, what if the person doesn't want to have lunch with me? To get your email, I only felt your warmth and genuine energy. And I think that was important actually for me to remember. It's nice to be asked to lunch, or nice to be asked to coffee, or nice that someone wants to connect. And, it's helped me think when I'm anxious following up with someone that actually they might think of it as a nice thing. Because, if you're providing something authentically, it can feel like the warm gesture that it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I really appreciate that.
Well, it's true. And I want to thank everyone for the networking that you're very actively doing in the chat. And I hope that can keep going after this event. The recording will be available on the Creative Capital curriculum. And thank you, Meredith, so much for this idea, for your insights, and for all the work you do as an extrovert, helping bring introverts like me together with broader communities. So and
You're welcome. Thank you so much, everybody.
And big thanks to our interpreters, our captioner, and to my colleague Saidu. So take care, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.